neuronex. And I think one of the themes I think that will become clear through this discussion is the uh, there's a lot of similarities across the networks, and there's also a lot of important differences across the network. So I'm going to talk about NeuralNext, which is one that I'm involved with, which is the Network for Excellence in Neuroscience Clinical Trials. It is a little bit different from most of the general networks or collaborative groups in that it was put together to do biomarker studies and phase 2 clinical trials really in neurological diseases across the spectrum of NINDS. So really anything that would not fit under StrokeNet or under Siren is fair game for NeuroNext. We're exclusively phase 2, no phase 3 clinical trials, but we cover a wide range of diseases. It was originally funded in 2011, and it was put together to kind of expand the NINDS capability to test promising new therapies, increase efficiency of clinical trials, and to respond quickly. But really, one of the motivating factors when it was put in place was there were a number of phase 3 clinical trials in neurology that would fail after seemingly positive phase 2 trial results. And one of the thoughts was the phase 2 trials may not be as rigorous as they need to be in order to really vet whether it's worthwhile to go forward to phase 3. And so one of the goals in putting NeuroNext together was to have this infrastructure in place to help investigators who have a good phase 2 clinical trial idea to make sure that it was set up in a well-designed and rigorous manner. And one of the key aspects of designing trials here is having clear go, no-go criteria specified a priori so that, in other words, you have to meet the go criteria to justify moving to phase 3. The no-go would suggest not. And I think an important discussion that often comes up in the design phase for these types of studies is can the study fail? Like, is there a way to meet the no-go? And if the answer to that is no, then we need to go back and reassess the design. So this is a kind of I'm not a fan of this particular slide, but it kind of is an attempt to try to show the complexity of the network. There are lots of different pieces among the Clinical Coordinating Center, Data Coordinating Center, other groups that will come in. I'll touch on some of these as we go through today, but this is really more of a high-level discusussion. The primary network infrastructure, it's kind of a partnership between NINDS, with Jonah Hayen, who's the program director, and Lumi Sawaki Adams, who's our project scientist. A clinical coordinating center that's based at Mass General Hospital, which currently has co-PIs, Marisakovic and Alex Vadinovich. And then Mary Ann Chase also plays a key role as the director of study operations. And then we serve as the data coordinating center at the University of Iowa with myself as the PI and Dixie Eklund as our director of operations. We also currently have 14 funded sites that have master trial agreements and have agreed to use a single IRB, which are kind of the network sites who are involved for the most part in conducting the studies. The sites, we're in our third cycle. And so there's been a little bit of changeover from sites from cycle 1 to cycle 2 to cycle 3. But a lot of the sites have stayed consistent. They're kind of chosen on their ability to conduct these types of phase 2 clinical trials and biomarker studies, as well as, regional diversity and so forth. This is kind of an example I put up, not to go deep into these, but it shows the completed phase 2 trials that have been done to date. And mostly I put this up to illustrate the wide range of diseases that we work in NeuralNext, which means kind of from protocol to protocol, there's not a lot that you can share from the disease-specific framework. There are some like standard modules for safety and drug and so forth that we could use, but we've ranged from, from Huntington's disease to, we did a stroke study prior to StrokeNet, Parkinson's disease, all the way down to, Fragile X, glioblastoma, spinal muscular atrophy. So a very wide range of diseases that we've seen and continue to see in NeuralNext. Just kind of the highlights, we've just finished our 14th year. As I mentioned, we started in 2011. We've had 11 studies funded to date. The nine that have been completed were on the prior slide. One is actively enrolling a study in NMDAR encephalitis, or the brain on fire disease, if you've seen that Netflix movie. And then we have one that's in follow-up, actually is just about to close out, should be closed out over the next 2 to 3 months in GNE myopathy. The other, in terms of operational efficiency, By having the network in place, we've been able to decrease study startup time. I think that'll be a common theme across the networks with master trial agreements and so forth, helping to meet recruitment and retention targets. We also have infrastructure to help develop the protocol so we can do some innovative study design and run some simulations, do some deeper dives into specific design aspects. And I think that'll be another theme that will come up across the different networks. And then a number of network partnerships. A lot of our studies are either directly or indirectly partnerships with industry. We do have, I think, about half of the neural net studies have direct partnerships with industry. Others at least have drug provided, or also in some cases, industry partners or foundations have provided travel support for participants to help with things like that. In our newest funding cycle, which we were refunded in 2023, there were a number of new initiatives. Two that I'll talk about the most are at the very top: the transition to the Other Transaction Authority and the Gene Therapy Consortium. Others that I won't talk about, but wanted to at least mention here is there's a new pediatric consortium. There's a lot of emphasis on increasing the number of pediatric trials in the network. Network-linked open conferences or brainstorming sessions. That's an annual meeting that is funded, which is developed. We just had one last week in Batten's disease. The theme is to bring experts together in a particular disease area that seems ripe for clinical trial to try to develop a proposal to then come into the network. We have a patient advisory council, a lot of education and training. Mark and Lori, who run the CTMC, are also the co-chairs of our NeuroNext Education Committee. So, some cross-sharing in the webinar. Some of the NeuroNext fellows might actually be on this webinar, but also some sharing of some of the network education activities with CTMC. We had clinical fellows in the second cycle. We continue to have a clinical fellow at each of the network sites. And we also added for the first time with this cycle a biostatistics fellow. I know Megan McCabe, who's doing the course, was our first biostat fellow, and we now have our second. And I think that is kind of a goal to try to integrate biostat trainees in our doctoral program with the types of study design aspects that we encounter in NeuroNext. So to kind of move into one of specific things, since many of you either in the short term or medium term, maybe even long term, might have something that would be applicable to NeuroNext across your disease area. We're accepting applications. Anyone can apply. A common, I think, misunderstanding is that you have to be at a network site to submit a proposal. That is not the case. Whether an individual is at a network site or somewhere that's not a network site, they are still eligible to submit a proposal for NeuroNext. We're currently looking for new studies. As I mentioned, there's an emphasis on phase 2 trials in adult and particularly pediatric populations. We've expanded in the 2023 renewal to look at gene therapy studies. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but we're looking for those as well as additional biomarker studies. We've transitioned to the OTA mechanism, the Other Transaction Authority, which gives NINDS a little more flexibility in the way that the assessment of these protocols are managed. There's actually a two-stage process, which I'll cover in just a minute. We also have an SBIR mechanism still in place. That's not used that frequently, but it is still a way that small businesses can come in to the network as well. This is the information about the regular OTA mechanism for the phase 2 clinical trials or biomarker studies. We have a QR code at the top. So you can either use the links here, which these slides will be shared, but also you can use the QR code to take you directly to information about the links for this. It's a two-stage process where the main objective is a proposal comes in. You would start by talking to NINDS. They would ask you for kind of a simple stage 1 proposal, which is roughly a little bit more than like the synopsis with some of the key ideas of the study, where the idea of the stage 1 review is it's more of a scientific review. Is this a promising study scientifically that would have merit to potentially do in the network? And so you have to pass that stage 1 review. Then it comes formally into the network with the network infrastructure to flesh out a clinical trial protocol, a formal statistical analysis plan, budget, grant application, and so forth. And that stage 2 review would be what is thought of as more roughly equivalent to a standard study section, although with OTAs, they're not study sections. They're handled in a slightly different manner. But if it gets through that, then it would be funded and implemented. I mentioned that we're doing gene therapy studies now in NeuroNext. That's a partnership with something called Urgent, or the Ultra Rare Gene-Based Therapy Network, which was funded in 2021 to look at kind of preclinical information on gene-based therapies, where it was to provide really support for the development of these types of therapies and to get them ready to go into clinical trials. The other aspect that's kind of parallel with that within NeuroNext is a gene therapy consortium. So this is a group of experts in gene therapy trials that can either provide feedback on proposals coming out of Urgent, or for other gene therapy proposals where somebody is thinking about coming into NeuroNext, where these experts are available to provide guidance during the conceptual phase. There's a lot of tricky aspects with gene therapy studies. So these are people who have lots of expertise and can weigh in to assist with trial design during the planning, and also to assist with implementation of trials. Those two kind of come together, so things can come directly from Urgent through the Gene Therapy Consortium, or from an idea through the Gene Therapy Consortium to an additional ROA that we currently have open in the network now as of 2023, which also is a two-stage process with stage 1 and stage 2, functions similar to what I just mentioned, but is for ultra rare gene-based therapy clinical trials. So these would be very different from our standard phase 2 clinical trials. And again, the QR code is at the top with the links provided here. So that is, I think, kind of the high level aspect of that. I know we'll have time for discussion later if people have more specific questions, but at this point, I think I'll turn it over to Pooja, who I think is going second, and we'll talk about StrokeNet.
Pooja, you're muted.
Yeah, you're muted, Pooja.
Oops, sorry about that. A lot of parallels here, as Chris alluded to. Give me 1 second here. I'm for some reason having trouble pulling this up. Try one more time. Here we go. Okay, hopefully you can see that okay. So a lot of parallels here for StrokeNet and NeuroNext. And I'll say that exactly what Chris said really was, it comes down to the idea of these networks is let's stop dismantling and then rebuilding infrastructure where we can. Let's create some stability and be able to share best practices and have, new research groups not start from scratch. I will throw a little historical context in here for those of you who are interested. The first kind of major network that involved the neurosciences was the NET, and it was phase 3 trials in emergency neurology. And as far as I know, it might have been the first one overall in NIH that actually started using master trial agreements. And then NeuroNext came along that Chris talked to you about with pilot trials in neurosciences. And then what happened was StrokeNet came along, building on the success with the need to kind of create a more robust platform specifically around stroke. So our charge is phase 2 and 3 trials in stroke in treatment, prevention, and recovery, plus training. And then, of course, Sharon will hit on Siren. So stroke kind of got pulled out of NET and NeuroNext when StrokeNet started. And so we were established in 2013. And the idea has been, our mission has been to harness the leadership and experience of the stroke field to efficiently create and complete high quality multi-site trials, related biomarker validation studies, and then ancillary studies to those trials, as well as train the next generation of stroke clinical researchers. And I'll mention as an aside that in addition to now having StrokeNet trainees that are investigators, we actually have a clinical research professional training and education program that's been really well received and was particularly necessary after the COVID pandemic as we were working to create a stable workforce. So pretty similar to what Chris talked to you about, we work, because these are large grants and these are cooperative grants. NIH help, NINDS specifically help us lead this network. They're on our operational calls and scientific calls. They also appoint an external oversight board, and then they appoint a data safety and monitoring board. The National Coordinating Center is housed at University of Cincinnati, and we provide overall leadership and coordination. And so that includes a central IRB. we do pharmacy distribution, and we do imaging collection, as well as readings for a subset of trials. And then the National Data Management Center is at Medical University of South Carolina, where there's both management as well as statistical collaboration. So we have 27 regional coordinating centers that are listed here, and they're associated with numerous sites. So a total of 500 sites actually that they're associated with, of which over 300 have enrolled at least in one trial. We also have several of our trials that have sites outside the US, 44 sites outside the US, in Canada, European countries, and in Japan. And then we do industry partnerships as well. So we've had several opportunities to develop trials and receive funding or other types of contributions from industry. At this point, we've completed 10 trials. 6 were definitive, including 2 platform trials. Specifically, we joined the network of networks that were doing the COVID trials during the pandemic, and we've also completed 2 pilot trials, 1 ancillary study as well. And we have 15 ongoing trials. I won't go through these, but I'll just put them here as a reference for you to know the kinds of things that we've completed. And I'll comment with these 15 ongoing trials or studies. In particular, there's been, we're keeping very busy getting these done. We've enrolled over 18,000 patients in trials. And we've had a chance to do a lot of innovative design features, which has been a lot of fun. And I feel like I've personally witnessed just getting smarter and smarter as we go along working together. And I think that's really the coolest thing about what we do. I want to highlight that we have a platform trial. And the idea with a platform trial is that you're asking multiple questions in sort of one statistical framework with one master protocol. We can talk about that more later if people are interested. And it actually uses that same other transactional authority mechanism that Chris Coffey talked about. So it's specifically focused on patients with medium and large vessel occlusions that have acute ischemic strokes. And it sort of hits all the facets of optimizing outcomes for those strokes. And like Chris was alluding to with the other transactional authority, it sort of opens up, it makes us a little more flexible. We have that same 2-stage proposal process. And then industry as well as international colleagues can engage with us to potentially bring questions to the platform. So I think most helpful for many of you as a clinical trial CTMC trainees is to hear a little bit about the process of how you engage with us. And I almost forgot to mention to you, I'm just going to go back for a second and say that several of these trials were actually developed in the clinical trial methods course. So a lot of fun success stories here. And I didn't take a full inventory, forgot to do that before I got on this call, but I definitely know Sleep Smart because I was in the clinical trial methods course when Devin Brown was designing Sleep Smart. So I was working on Prism, she was working on Sleep Smart. Captiva MRI is actually one of our StrokeNet fellows who also went through the clinical trial methods course, Adam de Havilland. And then both Step and Sister involve Eva Mystery, who went through the clinical trial methods course. So, just to let you know that we're all one big happy family, and we get to do a lot of cool stuff together. So getting back to how you engage with us, generally a trial in stroke will come to StrokeNet if you're going to have more than a few sites. And if there's a very good likelihood that you're going to kind of go through a pipeline that would lead to a phase 3 trial. So those are the reasons that NINDS would send you to us to use our infrastructure. And we have some robust groups that help develop our trials. Most importantly, are our working groups. Our acute stroke working group led by Karen Johnston at UVA and Jeff Saber at UCLA. Our prevention working group that's led by Human Kamel at Cornell and Scott Kasner at UPenn. And then our recovery working group led by Steve Kramer at UCLA and Stephen Wolf at Emory, actually now retired, but still working with us. And so the idea is, if you focus on the left here, if you have a concept that potentially could engage StrokeNet, you'd be talking to perhaps me or Joe, Broderick as the PIs of the National Coordinating Center, you could also go straight to your NINDS program officer, which is Scott Janis, as a first starting point, and just discuss the general concept. And if it seems like it's a good fit, we have you fill out a formal concept proposal. And then you bring it to the working group. And the idea of the working group is to try to make it better and stronger, and give you advice. It's not really a gatekeeping mechanism or anything like that. It's just to kind of help you have the best proposal possible, which you then bring to NINDS to get programmatic pre-approval through their extramural science committee, where they say like, yeah, this is something that's appropriate for StractMed. This would be, if you got a great score, it would be in our priorities. And then we move on together, and I can get into more detail later if people are interested, but we do a formal feasibility assessment and we prepare that application together. And then the right column is if it's specifically an asset, we call our new trial questions assets, that would be entered into the STEP platform. And again, that's very similar to what Chris just showed you in terms of stage 1, stage 2, and so on. So I'm going to end there, and I'll look forward to any questions. And I'll just say, I put this up to remind myself that there are so many people involved that it's impossible to put pictures to all of this, in terms of all the teamwork, and it's incredibly gratifying to work with this group of people. I'll turn things over to Sharon.
Thanks, Pooja. All right, I'm going to figure out how to share. Which screen do you see?
We're not
slides?
seeing any screen right now.
None right now, yeah.
Oh. Looks like you should see.
Now we're seeing. It says now we see.
How about now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I will, since Chris and Pooja did such a nice job highlighting the history and a lot of the things that all of the networks have in common, I'll just go through some of the things that make Siren maybe a little bit different. As Pooja mentioned, Siren started out in some ways as an extension of what was previously the Neurological Emergencies Treatment Trials Network, which was funded for about 10 years from 2006 to 2016, something along those lines. And then the network, formerly known as Siren, was incorporated with the Resuscitation Outcomes Consortium and some additional expertise from our cardiac and trauma communities into what is referred to as Siren. It is funded in collaboration between the NHLBI, NINDS, and NCATS. And we are really focused on, as Pooja mentioned, a very broad array of emergencies now that covers neurological emergencies, but also hematologic, respiratory, and cardiac emergencies, and really focusing on delivering interventions in the very earliest stage of care. As I mentioned, we're focused on early treatment. This early treatment often poses additional challenges for our researchers. And so the network focuses on ways in which we can improve the efficiency of the whole process, right? So we're talking about from consenting to intervention delivery to data capture. We're really hoping to work together with our clinical collaborators, our biostatisticians, our ethicists, everybody coming together to figure out where we can make the process most efficient, with the end goal of being able to really transform the clinical trial enterprise. And that in some instances means using complex adaptive designs that are really trying to answer a very specific question that's of interest. And sometimes it is approaching things from a more operational standpoint, where we are collecting data from a registry rather than on case report forms, or we might be working on document transfers, again, to aid in data capture or things like that. And always with a focus on community, both within the network and within our population of patients, right? We want to make sure that we're enrolling participants who are representative of the disease areas that are of interest. This is, I know Chris said he didn't like his picture of the network infrastructure. I couldn't find a good one either, but this is an example from a particular trial, just to show you that within our network, NIH funds a grant award to the scientific PI, and then that scientific PI, wherever his or her institution is, would form a subaward agreement in most cases with the clinical coordinating center and the data coordinating center. And those three entities would then work together to form the operations committee and the trial committee, the management committee, and so forth. We do use a single central IRB, which is for our network is Advara thus far, and we have worked with them to, as I mentioned earlier, document transfers so that regulatory documents and things like that are submitted into our clinical trials management system and then electronically transmitted to the IRB so that there isn't a duplication of efforts. So the NIH provides some infrastructure to the DCC and the CCC, and also to a number of award hubs, which I'll show you in just a minute. And those hubs may, or well, in most cases do, have at least one, if not multiple, what we refer to as spoke sites or participating hospitals that we are able to bring up for one or more of the trials that are being conducted within the network. We also have a number of working groups that are available to provide input and research education in things like human subjects protection. We have an EMS working group. We also have an education, training, and collaboration working group that is very active. So this is our representation. We have the Clinical Coordinating Center, which is at the University of Michigan, the Data Coordinating Center at the Medical University of South Carolina. And as I mentioned, each of the hubs has a number of spokes that participate in the various sites, and that representation geographically is shown here. We also do have a number of sites participating outside of the US in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and we are working to bring up the UK for one of our trials. Leadership at the CCC is driven by Dr. William Barson and Dr. Robert Silbergleit, both at the University of Michigan, as well as Cliff Calloway, who's at the University of Pittsburgh, and the administrative director, Valerie Stevenson, who we would not survive without. And a lot of the objectives of the coordinating centers are similar. So again, I'm just going to focus on a couple things. For the CCC in particular, the goal of each CCC representative when we're in the trial design process is really to work on how we can change the process to make sure that our trial will be encouraging translation, right? We don't want to just answer a question for the sake of answering the question. We want to answer the question to improve the world around us. And so we take that very seriously. And the CCC also takes very seriously the notion that we can improve our infrastructure so that we're constantly working to be more efficient, to be faster, to be more accurate within all of the network's activities. They also have a big role in education across the network and quality improvement. So they have an education coordinator who is involved with training.
Did she freeze?
That looks like Sharon, you're frozen, if you can hear us.
Give her a minute.
I think she might have dropped off. Hopefully can come back.
It's not a webinar till there's a glitch.
Otherwise, maybe we can start with some discussion if she's not back soon, right?
All right. If anyone
Hopefully
has,
she's not talking to herself. That's always the worst.
There she is.
Oh.
Okay. How far back did I lose you?
I think you were halfway through your CCC slide.
Ugh.
You were
Okay.
talking about like research and education, that second column.
So
Yeah.
sorry.
no worries, no problem.
Okay. You see, what do you see? The wrong one.
Oh, we
No,
see
no,
the
we see
slide.
it.
Good.
Okay. So I'm just going to assume I got this. They're involved in education and ensuring quality improvement. You should have been hearing from Valerie Drakowski today. She might have had better tech luck. But Valerie and I lead the Data Coordinating Center. And our Data Coordinating Center for the network is comprised of 3 sections: information systems, trial operations, and statistics. Our information systems core is basically everything that's related to our clinical trials management system, which we call WebDCU. It covers central randomization, tracking of study products, and regulatory documents. Because all of this is in the same system, we can put them to work for the development of project management tools. Trial operations, we have a number of data and project managers who bring years of experience in CRF development and data processing, and they work with our sites to provide user training and work with the statistical team for central data monitoring and help us all the way through database lock and archiving. We also have a statistics core who is involved in protocol design, development of the SAP. For this network, we do have the responsibility of generating reports for the DSMB and liaising with the DSMB, and creation of public use data sets. One thing that I will mention, I think sometimes that something that can be seen as a barrier to coming to the network is that in this course, we tell you to establish a relationship with your statistician early. That means that it may be the case when you get to our network, you already have a relationship with a statistician. And we are happy to collaborate with them. We can come up with something that works for everyone. So don't let that be a perceived barrier. We do have currently 6 clinical trials that are in some stage of completion, 4 active, 1 starting up, 1 completed, with 15 trial or ancillary grants and supplements funded. Because we do compete for funding, we do have a number of trials and other grant applications in the Siren development pipeline. Right now, that's about 30. As of earlier this year, we had enrolled about 2,800 patients across the country, across the world. I mentioned we have sites elsewhere. And I'll just highlight here some of the unique features of some of our clinical trials. The first was to be awarded was HOVIT. It's a late phase 2 design in traumatic brain injury. It uses response adaptive randomization, targeting the optimal combination of hyperbaric oxygen therapy for improving outcomes, and it is enrolling under exception from informed consent. Boost 3 is also enrolling under exception from informed consent, and it was actually our first experience conducting EFIC activities with a central IRB. We had done it before in NET with all of the individual institutions using their own IRBs. This was our first central experience. ICECAP in adults and pediatric ICECAP are both adaptive dose finding trials in participants with cardiac arrest. Both use adaptive randomization. And we very quickly spun up a clinical trial in COVID-19 convalescent plasma in 2020 that was completed in 2021. More recently, we had an extension of adult IceCap that was funded. We refer to it as post IceCap, that is taking both IceCap participants and screen failures and following them for a year to evaluate the trajectory of recovery. And our most recent award is KSET or KeySet. I'm not really sure how we're referring to it, but these are patients in refractory status epilepticus and evaluating whether levetiracetam can be improved in terms of seizure recovery. In addition to those, we have development in a number of different disease areas. And I just want to spend a few minutes talking about the process for solicitation. Again, our trials are really intended to address treatment for emergency conditions that are under the purview mostly of NINDS and NHLBI. And we're tasked with phase 3 or late phase 2 interventional treatment or health services trials. So really not pilot studies. They have to be big enough that the infrastructure is needed to bring up this complex system of hubs and spokes as needed. And this is, for the most part, very similar to what you've heard from the other networks. Trial ideas can come from anywhere. You can approach one of the Siren leadership. You can approach one of our NIH program officers. And then we will work together to evaluate the fit of the project for the network, to contribute to the concept, to evaluate feasibility. We are not another layer of scientific peer review. So we will see how we can make it work, or if we can make it work in the network, but we don't say, no, you can't do this, or you must do this. We can work with the investigator to put together the summary and the rough budget that goes to NIH for pre-approval. And then the grant application would go through the similar study section process, with the award working in one of two ways, depending on the funding center. So our funding opportunities are institute specific. So for disease areas that are relevant to NINDS, there is a single grant application where the application goes to the scientific PI and subawards to the CCC and the DCC. Funding opportunities for disease areas that are relevant to NHLBI actually exist as companion applications, one for the Data Coordinating Center and one for the Clinical Coordinating Center. Okay. Are there questions, I guess, for any of us? Comments? Sorry about my technical difficulties.
I have a comment in that just so that the current crew of CTMC participants knows, is that the history of the CTMC has previous participants who all have been embedded or submitted grants or come from institutions that comprise NeuroNext, StrokeNet, or Siren. So these relationships are long going and highly appreciated. So this is one of the reasons why we're having you guys talk, because it's a network of colleagues that I think we can draw upon the strengths of everybody for general success. So it's more of a comment, and basically I'm stating a paragraph from the grant application that I made. But it is true. And so I just want to emphasize to our trainees that, please invest in these, think of these networks, because there is a mutual support system that is valuable to try to take advantage of. So it's a general statement, no question.
Yeah, actually, Mark, I thought of a couple more people who went through CTMC after I did the presentation. So there are a lot of them that have come through StrokeNet.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Marcus Pinto has raised his hand. Go ahead, Marcus. As soon as you become unsilent.
Back to you.
There you are. Oops. Now you're silent again.
Yeah.
Yay. Whatever you're doing, keep it
Can you
that.
guys hear me or no?
Yeah, we hear you.
Oh,
We hear
great.
you.
Okay. Yeah, because Zoom is acting up here on me too, not only you, Sharon. So a question I have is for Chris. So on step, the stage one process of a NeuroNext proposal, I've seen even the like the format, yeah, it's kind of simple. And then on phase two, the review of the full proposal, it's NeuroNext or is NINDS that reviews the proposal?
NINDS manages the reviews of all the networks. So none of the, I think Pooja and Sharon could correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure none of the networks have like dedicated funding for trials. The networks have funding for infrastructure, and then all proposals reviews are handled by NINDS just like any other grant application. And then if funded, then there's funding to support the project, but then it can also tap into the infrastructure of each of the networks to help with the study conduct.
But maybe part of what it might have blurred for you when you're seeing that stage one and stage two is that stage one, you get that conceptual approval. And Chris, I don't know if it's the same for you as with us with our OTA mechanism, where we then would work with you
Correct.
to create it as part of the design for the stage two application, which would go to NINDS.
Perfect. That makes a lot of sense.
I will note for folks that one of the deliverables that each of you are working towards is a protocol form, which is essentially the same protocol form with some adjustments that goes to each of these networks. Mainly, it's modeled on the NeuroNext one, but I can't imagine that's much different. So the protocol you are doing, if it's right, can go directly to any one of these institutions.
I think, and Marcus, to kind of expand on that answer and also on what Pooja said, I think one of the other big advantages that you get into stage two across these networks is that you get access to these experts from the network who, as much as helping you flesh out the design and flesh out the protocol, can also, I think, equally important, provide advice to someone on like what not to put in the grant or what not to do in your design. And I think that can be equally important.
I think that's a great point. I mean, I will say NIH landscape is changing a little bit now that the reviews for these trials had been based on review sections that were institute specific for some of these, and now it's all getting centralized. So it's a little bit different, but we felt like we mastered some of the rules of the game, and we're not sure if the rules are going to change slightly. But the bottom line is we learn together, and then this common knowledge exists in the network of sort of what's going to fly, what's going to be harder to fly.
We have a
Right.
question in the chat, which is, what is the right career stage for an investigator to approach you with an idea? Are you looking for people who have already been independently funded, or is it reasonable to consider pitching a project while transitioning out of a training grant?
I can speak from NeuroNext, and then Pooja and Sharon can speak from the others. So NeuroNext, I think the right time is when you have a good idea that be ready for a multi-site phase 2 clinical trial in some disease area. And we have had, in NeuroNext, we've had PIs who have been experienced and done, several clinical trials before. And we've also had people who come to us who have never run a clinical trial single center before. And that's part of, I think, the appeal of the network, to help someone who, hasn't done that, doesn't have easy access to the infrastructure needed to carry that out, to provide that for them, as long as they have the good idea. The idea is that the network brings all of the organizational, operational pieces that's needed to then get that trial done.
Yeah, I would agree that it's less about the career stage of the investigator and more about the stage of the question that you're asking. And I will say that if you come to Siren, at least with a question that's a little too early in its development for Siren, that doesn't mean that we just say it's too early. Go see NeuroNext and see what they can do, or go see whoever. But sometimes we can still collaborate to say this would be great once it hits late stage. So let's work together now so that we can help you make sure that we're answering the right questions so that at the end of the earlier stage, you're ready to move it directly into Siren. And I think that for a junior investigator to have the network infrastructure available to support everything that goes into a grant application can be a huge bonus.
I'll add another element to it, and maybe this is StrokeNet specific. Sharon and Chris can chime in, but I will say that we're very large, and yet our infrastructure is, in terms of its leadership, is relatively small. So when someone like submits a trial, a grant application, that MPI team is really running that trial, and they get some support from us, but not like at the end of the day, it's their trial. And so when we've had people who come right out of training who want to do a large scale multi-center trial, we've strongly encouraged them to partner with MPIs who have the experience of having run a major trial. It's just sort of the recipe for success with grant applications. That's for general StrokeNet applications. But for us now with our platform trial, in other words, that other transactional authority OTA mechanism, that one's a little different. And probably not worth it for me to go into too much detail, but because of the way we've run it, the step trial platform leadership run the overall platform, relatively junior people are coming in with ideas and we can carry them together because we're all running it so hands-on together. So we have a couple distinctions like that. So, but bottom line, I think I agree with Sharon and Chris. You come to us, we help you. You get working group input. Maybe we say to you, like, you could use a little bit more help. You probably want to create an MPI team to get this expertise or that expertise, but we're all very receptive to hearing from you. Let's put it that way. I don't know. Would you have anything else, Chris or Sharon?
Thank you. We still have time for more questions. You can chat them or just unmute and ask.
I will, I guess, put a plug in. This is somewhat self-serving, I guess, but part of the appeal of going to the network is probably at least a third, if not half, of the statisticians who regularly work in neurology are affiliated with one of these networks.
Yeah, that is some great know-how. And I will say, just also, if you have a statistician you're already working with, don't think that doesn't mean, at your local institution, that doesn't mean you shouldn't approach a network, because that relationship can stay intact. In other words, your lead study statistician can come from your local institution, but then they get supported by the infrastructure we have with the statisticians in our networks.
Yeah, absolutely. We have several different models for how that could work in Siren, so please don't consider that a barrier.
I guess the other thing I'll mention, since I don't see any questions, is to not underestimate how much time it takes to develop a multi-center trial. I think sometimes people come to us and they're like, okay, it's January. I want to get my trial in for the February deadline. That has happened. It's like, just, it's not happening. It takes a lot of time to just, refine these ideas and help you get a winning idea. And I'll say another bragging point, and hopefully it'll stay the same as peer review centralizes, is that we tend to have a pretty good success rate at this point. It might take a few tries, but I'm forgetting the exact number we've got recently, but it's on the order of like 30% of the time that concept will eventually get funded, especially if ever they're incorporating our feedback and everything. Which, when you think of the ratio of overall grants, that's pretty high. And these are very expensive grants typically.
One of the SOPs for the network is a grant writing timeline. And I believe that it's on the public facing webpage. So it might be eye-opening, even if you're not, even if you're not going to the network, to see, how long it takes to make sure that all of the pieces are in place, especially when you're collaborating across multiple institutions.
That's a great idea. That's a great tool, even if you think your study doesn't belong in a network.
And I will mention one final pitch, to go back to Pooja's statement, it takes a while, is that in the fall, for interested participants, we do have a mock study section. And I think part of the deal is, even though our small groups and the whole process of the CTMC is focused upon creating viable protocols, further peer review never hurts. And so I would encourage folks in this class to participate in the fake study section, if you will, to help strengthen further the proposals before they go out.
Yeah, and just to, I mean, maybe to tack on to that, Mark, I think one of the big advantages of that, besides getting feedback on your proposal, is, I mean, those of us who do a review it like a real study section would, but we allow you to join as well, so you can hear the process and get a sense of how that goes, which you never get, to your grants in general. So I think I concur with Mark and would encourage people, if you can make it, to take advantage of that, because it's a great learning exercise to both get feedback on your proposal, but also to get a better look under the hood and how these types of proposals are assessed in study section. Or, to Pooja's point, traditionally have been. I guess everything's kind of a whole new world now.
I will just say, as someone who's been writing grants for a while, I still do mock reviews when I'm putting in a new grant. So I personally think that's just like the way to do it, because you just find your blind spots. So I'd strongly encourage that point.
And it always keeps you humble too.
Yeah.
It is,
Yeah, you got to stay humble through this process.
oh my gosh, it can be scathing sometimes, but hey, you survive. Okay. All right, it is getting 4 minutes to the hour. Thank you for your attendance. My group is meeting right after this, so we're going to be on time. So have a great week, and I'm looking very forward to seeing everyone in Charlottesville in a couple short weeks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Pooja, Sharon, and Chris.
You're welcome. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.